So here we are, looking at the final scene of King Lear, Act 5, Scene 3. Remember, go to your notebooks. This is on page 58, and your job is to read the summary that I've written, and hopefully you found the summaries useful to build your knowledge of the play. This is the final recording where I'm going to get into the what happens in the play, the key quotes, the story, before we then embark on some of our analysis videos. But by the time we get to the recorded classes, I'm hoping that your knowledge of the play will be deep and we can really talk about how to use that knowledge to write effective essays. Before we get there, we're going to look at the final scene of the play. Again, you're going to read that yourself, and I'd ask you then to go to page 61 of your paper 2 notebook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what happens in this scene through the quotation. So let's get going, and you might find some of this useful. So we know the scene begins with Lear and Cordelia captured. A queen and a king under arrest, and that should be, or we imagine that would be, the cause of great despair, but it's not. Look at what Cordelia says. She says, "We are not the first who, with best meaning, have endured the worst. For thee, oppressed king, am I cast down. Myself could else outfrown false fortune's frown." Now again, I said before when talking about Cordelia, sometimes she's a bit too good to be true. But my goodness me, that's a great quote to learn. If you want to sum up the virtue, the decency, the honourable, symbolism of Cordelia's role in the play, just read that. She calls her father oppressed king. He is the king. He's God's anointed. So her concern is not for herself, but for him being oppressed, which means mistreated. And she says, "Dad, I can cope with suffering. I can cope with suffering. I can out-frown false fortune's frown." Great use of language by Shakespeare. False fortune is bad luck. "I can cope with this, Dad. It's no bother. I'm just worried about you." So there we have her selfless, concerned only for her father's welfare, again representing all that is good in humanity. Lear, indefinitely one of the most important moments in the whole play, says, "Yeah, do you know what, Cordelia? You're right. So what if we lost the battle? I have you. We love each other. So even if we're in prison, we'll be okay." Now again, if you want to think about transformation, you want to think about the fundamental change, the transition from hubris to humility that Lear goes through in the play. The agents of that change are physical and psychological suffering and the redemptive power of love from Cordelia. If you want to see a moment in the play which sums up his transformation, this is the moment. This is the moment. As much as "which of you shall we say doth love us most" sums up his hubris, what he says here sums up his humility. He says, "Come, let's away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in a cage." Fantastic. "When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down." He's saying he'll kneel. He expected everybody else to kneel before, "and ask of thee forgiveness. And so we live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies and hear poor rogues talk of court news." Wow. Shakespeare. A whole shelf full of Shakespeare's books of analysis of Shakespeare there, the plays, the poems. The guy was amazing. What does that mean? We will sing like birds in a cage. Well, when a bird is caged, it has its freedom taken away. But if it has a companion, it can still sing. It's a poetic and beautiful way of saying, once I have you, I have all I need. I can cope with everything else. Now, what a beautiful thing for Lear to say. Could the Lear of Act 1 have said something like that? Have had such a mature insight into what is valuable in this world and in this life? And then for me, something which I think a lot of people miss is his comment that he'd laugh at gilded butterflies. The word gilded means golden. A butterfly is impressive and beautiful, but by its very nature, it's ephemeral. It's transient. In other words, it doesn't last. Its lifespan is short. The gilded butterfly, the golden butterfly, is a metaphor that represents power. And Lear understands that power and all of the things associated with it are transient. They don't bring fundamental, meaningful happiness to your life. What does is family and love. Status is not something which dominates his sense of self anymore. The need for respect, the need to be knelt down before, has been purged from him. That person no longer exists. He is transformed and much, much, much more sympathetic character than we could have imagined could have been at the outset of the play. So that's a really important quote. And of course we go, oh, not lovely, oh, hooray, Lear's learned to be a better man. But this is Shakespeare. And Shakespeare wants to make this final scene, this denouement, which means the final action of the play, exciting. Because no sooner do Lear and Cordelia leave the stage, going to sing like birds in a cage, than the darkness descends and in walks Edmund, and Edmund walks up to one of his soldiers and he gives him an order, and the order is to kill Lear and Cordelia. And he says, know down this: men are as the time is. To be tender-minded does not become a sword. I mean, again, the Machiavellian, immoral Edmund, the corrupt Edmund, just captured in beautiful, direct language by Shakespeare. Men are as the time is. What does that mean? When the times are cruel, you have to be cruel. We live in cruel times, you have to be ruthless. The sword is an image of destruction. To be tender-minded is to be merciful. He says, there's no room for mercy in my world. And boy, is that true. Boy, is that true of Edmund. He says, thy great employment will not bear question. Either say I'll do it or thrive by other means. So Edmund is absolutely and utterly ruthless. He will destroy Lear and Cordelia. Not because he has any particular, axe to grind, or what would my kids say, beef with Lear and Cordelia. They're just in his way. He feels so close to the crown. He feels as if he can achieve something that no other bastard illegitimate child could have achieved, and he will let nothing get in his way. And so when Albany comes on stage and Albany asks, where are Lear and Cordelia? He tries to put off Albany by saying the question of Cordelia and her father requires a fitter place. He tries to tell Albany, and we won't talk about it here now, we'll talk about it at a different time. Because he's giving his agent, the man who he said men are as the time is, he's giving him time to get the job done. Regan, in order to defend her beloved Edmund from Albany, Albany asserts his authority against Edmund and says, look, we're not equals. Do what you're told. Regan says, I'll tell you he's your equal. And then she turns around to Edmund, and this is his third moment of triumph. I wonder, can you remember the first two? First one, loyal and natural boy, I'll work the means to make thee capable. The second one, Cornwall, it has made thee Earl of Gloucester. So we know that Edmund used trickery and deceit and duplicity to achieve his goals. And here we have Regan handing him a crown. She says, General, take you my soldiers, prisoners, and most importantly, patrimony. Dispose of them of me, the walls are thine. Witness the world that I create thee here, my Lord and Master. Regan is handing him her patrimony. Her patrimony is what she received from her pater. Her pater is her father. What she received from her father is royal authority. So we have Regan making Edmund a king. And we are, as an audience, going, oh my God, he's done it. He wanted to climb to the top and he's there. But of course, what Shakespeare does brilliantly then is bring in the big plot twist. Because Albany has read the letters. And he knows that Edmund has participated in an illegal plot to commit the murder of a senior nobleman of Albany. So he arrests Edmund. And in Edmund's moment of triumph, just as he reaches for the crown, it's all snatched away from him. He's arrested on capital treason, which means punishable by death. And brilliantly, if you want to talk about Shakespeare's use of imagery, along with Edmund, the gilded serpent is arrested. And again, the imagery is so brilliant. I love the biblical allusion, the reference to the Bible. The serpent, the symbol of corruption, the symbol of the devil incarnate. And golden, rich, powerful. Who is rich and powerful but the devil incarnate? Well, Albany describes his wife in that way. So Goneril, she's arrested and she will receive justice. When Edmund decides to deny the truth of what he's been accused of, the trumpet sounds, and who arrives in? Edgar. And Edgar delivers this fantastic monologue before dueling and fighting with Edmund. And in that monologue, he says, despite thy victor sword and fire new fortune, thy valour and thy heart, thou art a traitor. Thou art a traitor, false to thy gods, thy brother and thy father, conspirant against this high illustrious prince, that's against Albany, and from the extremest upward of thy head to the descent and dust below your foot, a most toad-spotted traitor. I mean, it's just fantastic. So Edgar, he knows the truth of his brother. He knows his brother's a liar, a traitor, a manipulator, a villain, and he challenges him and they fight. And when they fight, of course, Edgar, who Edmund dismissed earlier in the play, he dismissed him as it was Goneril who used the phrase moral fool, but as somebody who was so honest as to be weak. He described his foolish honesty and said, my practices ride easy over his foolish honesty. Well, Edgar is no longer that weak, pathetic dupe, that trusting fool. Edgar is now strong, and he proves his status as somebody who could be king by his physical bravery when he fights and wounds Edmund fatally. Edmund, dying, says, what you have charged me with, that I have done. And then he boasts and hints at the plot on Lear's life and Cordelia's life. And more, much more, the time will bring it out. Now, for those of you who've been told, well, Edmund has a big conversion, a Pauline conversion at the end of the play, and then he's a good man. He's not a good man. Here he is boasting, yeah, I'm going to die, but even after I die, you'll suffer because of me. There's no sense of regret there. There's only bitterness and spite. What changes is when he learns who the person he's fighting really is. Don't forget, Edgar's in disguise. And when Edgar tells him, I am no less in blood than thou art, Edmund. If more, the more thou hast wronged me. My name is Edgar and my father's son. And then when he goes on to tell that story, how he never revealed myself to Gloucester until a half an hour passed, when I was armed, ready to come for this fight. And he tells Edmund and he tells the audience what happened to Gloucester. And he says, I told him who I was. I told him who poor Tom really was. I told him I was there when he tried to commit suicide. I told him the story. And Gloucester, overwhelmed by gratitude, but also by guilt and heartbreak. His flawed heart, too weak the conflict to support, twixt two extremes of passion, joy and grief, burst smilingly. So Gloucester, we learn, is dead, died of a broken heart, died of the exertions of the recent past, a recent past where his whole world collapsed. His whole world collapsed because of his own failings, his impetuosity, his rash rush to judgment on Edgar, his foolish trust in Edmund, but also because of his king's decision to abdicate. And when we hear this, because we know Gloucester was a man who made mistakes, but was fundamentally a good man, we are shaken. We want the good people to survive, but not in this play. Not in this play. And who else is shaken? Edmund. But before Edmund can try in his life to do one good thing, more news arrives in. Goneril, she had been arrested. Regan had complained about feeling unwell. Now the gentleman comes in and he tells us that both Goneril and Regan are dead. Oh, she's dead. Your lady, sorry, he's talking to Albany, your wife, your lady and her sister by her is poisoned. She confesses it. Goneril has taken her own life because she cannot live as a prisoner. She's the opposite of Cordelia. She's the opposite of the Lear at the end of the play. She's lost everything, so she takes her own life. But before she took her own life, she murdered her own sister in a fit of jealous rage. A dire human being, an utterly contemptible and corrupt human being, and a squalid way for those women to have their lives end, but somehow suitable given what they became in their pursuit of vengeance against their father. Edmund tells us, some good I mean to do despite my own nature. And he goes on to say, look, I've ordered for Lear to be killed and Cordelia. And of course, that's Shakespeare just bringing it, the final action of the play, where Lear, we think there's hope, and then you snatch the hope away, where Lear arrives on stage carrying the body of Cordelia. And if Cordelia symbolised all that's good in the world, her murder symbolises all that is bad in the world. And Lear can't cope. I know when one is dead and when one lives. She's dead as earth. Lend me a looking glass. He desperately wants to see if her breath forms on a mirror. If that her breath will mist or stain the stone, why then she lives. And then Lear dies. And as he dies, his last words are emblematic of his tragedy. They're emblematic of the transformation that has occurred in him. Why his tragedy? Because our Joy, the daughter who he said at the beginning of the play was his favourite, the daughter who was so good and so forgiving and so fundamentally decent, she's dead because of him. He didn't kill her, but her death is a direct result of that stone he threw in the pond when he abdicated and the ripple effect of that chaos that he unleashed. Why transformation? Because his last words are not for himself. At the end of the play, Lear's not thinking of himself. He's thinking of Cordelia. And that is a really profound change in the way he looks at the world. When he dies tragically. He dies and there is a sense of tragedy. We know the kingdom now has no king and no queens, no Goneril, no Regan. So who will take power? Who will fill the vacuum? Albany trying, he's a soldier but not a statesman, trying to find a solution, offers the crown to Kent and to Edgar. You twain rule in this realm and the gored state sustain. I love that image. To be gored is to be ripped open by the horn of a bull or of an animal. The nation has been ripped apart by Lear's abdication and the cruelty of Goneril, Regan, Cornwall and their faction Edmund. But Kent, he doesn't want the crown. He says, I have a journey, sir, shortly to go, my master calls me, I must not say no. And the sense is that Kent, this guy who we've always admired from minute one of the play, he hasn't gone through any transformation. Yeah, he had a disguise, but he has been steady and decent and virtuous and moral and noble and strong all the way through. But he's broken by the tragedy that has unfolded, and he feels suicidal. So when he says the journey, he's referring to his desire to take his own life. And so the crown falls to Edgar. But the end of the play, we'll talk about when we look at the Edgar mind map why the crown falls to him. But at the end of the play, Albany delivers this speech, which gives us a sense of fundamental pessimism. That, you know, when the war is over, and you see those images of, you know, if you look at the end of World War II or the First World War, people out in the streets waving the flag, celebrating. Well, war is traumatic. War causes long-lasting damage. And when a nation goes through a trauma, that trauma will stay for generations with that nation. And that's the sense that Albany's final speech delivers. The sense that the nation has been traumatized. And that trauma, don't forget, this is why Lear has to die at the end of the play, and he has to die with his heart broken. That trauma was unleashed by our tragic hero, whose hamartia, hubris, caused him to believe that he could do things that he couldn't do, and caused the kingdom to plunge into chaos. Albany says, the weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most. We that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. The negativity, the never and the nor, the sense of disbelief at what's gone on, leaves the audience shocked and moved and knowing that they've just watched a play that is for the ages. And King Lear really is a play for the ages.